The year was 1995. I sat alone in my car in the parking lot of the Union County Public Health Office in Monroe, North Carolina. It was never a place I planned to be or intended to be. This was not part of the plan. This was not supposed to happen, but it did. The world was on the backside of the huge AIDS epidemic that raged for years and took many lives. Magic Johnson had just announced he was HIV positive a few years earlier, proving that no one was immune to the disease. I sat in my car, pondering, thinking, talking to God. God, I said, if people could just do it your way, the way you set up from the beginning. One man, one woman, one lifetime. Sexual purity. One of the most precious gifts you give to us, God. And if everybody could just do as you planned, hold that gift of purity until they enter into a marriage covenant relationship, and then enjoy it in covenant the way it was meant to be from the beginning of time. If everyone could just give it the esteem you gave it when you first created it, none of this would be happening. All of this broken down, fractured life, so much of it can simply be attributed to humanity deviating from your prescribed plan, God. When we deviate from the plan, everything gets busted up. And sadly, we're still falling into that lie today. Still too much deviation and destruction. None of this was ever supposed to happen, but it did. So as I sat alone in the car praying, I was waiting for my then newly found girlfriend, Lori Eads, to exit the building. Lori and I had just started dating a year earlier, right out of college. A year earlier, I had the incredible opportunity of leading her to Christ. Her life had changed from what she was. She was a new person. And now, we were turning a corner into a potentially serious relationship that could go deeper and have a future. Who knows? Maybe even marriage. Only one problem. Our sexual and spiritual histories had not been the same up until this point in our young lives. Somehow, by the grace of God, even though I wasn't perfect, but due to my spiritual and biblical convictions, I had made it through high school and college holding to God's plan of purity until I entered a marriage relationship. That was my plan. It was still the plan at that moment. It was going to be the plan. But my new girlfriend, Lori, I had recently discovered did not have the same history as mine. I had always wanted to be married to someone who had saved themselves as I had. There lies that this was never supposed to happen issue. If we were to have a future, she had to be tested. I had to know. Maybe I was right to ask for it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was self-righteous to ask, or maybe since I had held out, I had the right to know, especially if we were going to talk anything about marriage in a future. Maybe she needed to know as well. But none of that is relevant now. What is relevant is that amazingly and humbly she agreed to the test. And there in that moment, with me waiting in the car and her in the public health office, getting the test, together, we were walking right through a this was never supposed to happen moment. And amazingly, God was right in the middle of it with us. And that is where we find the Israelites today in our story. In 1 Samuel chapter 10. They are right in the middle of that. This was never supposed to happen moment. The Bible tells us there in 1 Samuel chapter 10, beginning at verse 17, that just as Saul is about to be acclaimed the king, the new king, the desired king of Israel, Samuel called all the people of Israel to meet before the Lord at Mizpah. And he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, has declared. I brought you from Egypt and rescued you from the Egyptians and from all the nations that were oppressing you. But though I have rescued you from your misery and distress, you have rejected me, your God, today. And instead you have said, 'No, we want a king instead.' Now therefore, present yourselves before the Lord by tribes and clans." The plan for a king was never God's plan. It was he, not Saul, who was supposed to be their king. None of this was ever supposed to happen. The lost donkeys, the women at the well, all the details, the baggage dropped. But not 1 second of it was ever supposed to happen.
And yet it was. But you know, in some movies and TV shows sometimes, they do a flashback. You'll see something like, it'll say 1 year earlier or 10 years earlier. Well, that's what we're doing now. Just do a quick backtrack to chapter 8. Because see, in this chapter, God tells, the people have been calling for a king because other nations had kings and they wanted a king. And even though God was their king, they wanted a king they could see. They wanted a king they could experience and touch. And so they cried out for it. And it was really starting to bug Samuel, who was the prophet. And God says, no, just give them what they want. But it's not supposed to be that way. In 1 Samuel 8, verse 7, it says, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. It was a rejection of God himself. Now, if you're a parent, there might be a time where you can remember where your child wanted to do something, and you knew it wasn't the best thing, but they really wanted to do it, and maybe you let them do it. I remember when our kids were young, and I think it was Austin, but it could have been Elena. But I remember clearly there was an argument going on with their mama. It was a cold day outside, and Tiff was saying, you got to wear a coat. And we'll just say it's Austin. But Austin was like, I don't want to wear a coat. Oh, boy, you're going to wear a coat. It's cold outside. I don't want to wear a coat. And I remember coming in going, listen, let him go without a coat. But, honey, it's cold outside. I said, honey, he's going to figure it out. He's going to realize he's cold. And by the way, boy, when you go out and you get cold, don't come back complaining. Don't go to the office and ask them to call me to come bring you a coat. You choosing to go without a coat, you're going to go without a coat today. I remember one time our staff, back when I was in Winston-Salem, our church staff, we went on a retreat. We were out in the mountains, and one of our staff members, her husband's a deputy sheriff, and he brought some guns. We set up a little range there. And I remember it was one of those handguns. I couldn't tell you which one. I'm not much of a gun man, but he said it had a slide on it, all right, if you know what I'm talking about. And he said, hold the gun like this and fire like this. He goes, don't hold it up too high. Because when that slide kicks, if your hand's up too high, he said, it's a self-correcting mistake. Because that little piece right in here, he said, it'll tear it up. It'll tear it up. God said to Samuel, he said, give the people what they want. But make sure you tell them what the consequences are going to be. Tell them what's going to happen. Because this is never supposed to be, but I'm going to allow it. And he tells them that in chapter 8, verse 11. He says, that king's going to put your sons in the military involuntarily. Verse 12, he'll put your sons to work making instruments of war. Verse 13, he'll put your daughters to work as perfumers and bakers and cooks. Verse 14, he's going to take the best of your crops. This king will take a tenth of your crops. Verse 15. Verse 16, he'll take the best of your servants. Verse 17, he'll take a tenth of your livestock. And then verse 18, and it says, and in that day you will cry out because of your king. You're going to cry out. You're going to be like, this isn't what we expected, but I've already told you what's happening. So when you cry out about this king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. He says, you want a king so bad? I'll give you a king. But here's what you're going to get. Here are the consequences. And when you get that, don't come crying to me. Now here's the thing. With all that said and all that groundwork laid, does that mean that when the not supposed to happen happens, that God then pulls away and has no more involvement in the life of Israel, or no more involvement in your life? Is that what it means? Has God become distant?
See, because when you deviate from the plan, it blows everything up. And God, in giving us the amazing gift of free will allow that to happen. But if we submit to Him, He can take the blown up plan and work it to beauty. But how is it that He gets into the middle of this was not supposed to happen if it was not supposed to happen? See, that's who He is. That's what He does. Even when this was not supposed to happen happens, God can break into the middle of it and work it for the good. But how do we know that? How do we know? How could God be this was never supposed to happen? Mark, you spent 3 weeks telling us about chasing donkeys and baggage and all this details, and God's in the details, and you got to first learn to be great and ordinary before you learn to be great, extraordinary. None of that was supposed to happen. No, but was God still in it? Yep. Because He can still be great and you're not supposed to happen. And here's how we know. 2 things today. 1 Samuel chapter 10, 2 verses I haven't read to you yet. Right after Saul is anointed as king, Samuel says to him, Saul, after these signs take place, do what must be done, for God is with you. You'll want to underline that part. You notice? God is with Saul. God is with you in the not. This is never supposed to happen, but God is with you. That's real important. God is with you in this was never supposed to happen. And He says to Saul, do what must be done, for God is with you. In other words, you're the man. You're the king now. God's with you. Go do what must be done. God is on your side. He is by your side. Go and lead. You're the man. And then verse 8, he follows it up. Then go down to Gilgal ahead of me, and I will join you there to sacrifice burnt offerings and peace offerings. And you must wait for 7 days until I arrive and give you further instructions. Did you just notice what happened? You probably didn't, so I'm going to tell you. Samuel says, verse 7, Saul, you're the man. God's with you. Go do what God says. And when you do it, everybody will know God's with you. But then go down to Gilgal, and I'm going to tell you what to do next. Let me say it again. God's with you. You're the man. Go do it. But then go down here, and I'm going to tell you what to do next. Meaning, no matter how much God gets into you. And we know that God had just changed Saul. Remember a couple weeks ago? God changed Saul into a brand new man. He gave him a new heart. But no matter how much God changes you, you are never above accountability or instruction. No matter how far or how deep you get into this was never supposed to happen, or even this was supposed to happen, you are never apart from God's supervision. No one is ever above reproach or God's accountability or anyone else's accountability or instruction. Samuel says to Saul, you're the man. God's with you. Go lead. But you still ain't above accountability or instruction. So you go down here and you wait for me. Then I'm going to tell you what to do next. You notice that amazing juxtaposition there? Saul could have said, well, I'll tell you what, Samuel. Since I'm the man and I'm the king and God's with me, first thing I'm going to do is not do what you say do. You're fired. But he didn't do that. This is the time of Saul's life where he's actually smart and humble. And he says, okay, I'll do that. And he does exactly what he's told to do. No matter how much God changes you, no matter how much God is with you, you are never above accountability or instruction. No leader, no CEO, no police chief, fire chief, teacher, principal, boss is ever above accountability or instruction. No pastor is ever above accountability or instruction. If you're at a church or a corporation or somewhere where the leader or the pastor or the boss is sitting on an island by themselves and they have no one around them to hold them accountable or give them instruction, run away as fast as you can, because you are in a dangerous situation, because no one is above accountability or instruction. I am the lead pastor of He's Alive Church. I'm the lead dog. It's my responsibility to lead out front and make decisions and cast vision. But I don't lead on an island by myself. I am held accountable by a leadership team who leads in plurality alongside me. And they hold me accountable. And to a lesser degree, our staff holds me accountable. And each and every one of you holds me accountable. And in our bylaws, it's set up from the very beginning that if I in any way compromise the sanctity or the mission or the vision of He's Alive Church, they can throw me out. Because no leader, no one anywhere, even if God's hand has initiated their responsibility, no one is above accountability or instruction, because God governs the plan. Even in your, this was not supposed to happen. So that means there's no mom, no dad, no husband, no wife, no child, no brother, no sister who's ever above accountability or instruction. I know there's an old saying that goes, if mama ain't happy, that sounds great, but it ain't true, because mama's accountable too. Everyone is accountable. No one is above instruction. So I ask you the question today, who are you accountable to? And your spouse only counts half. That's not full. That's why church matters. That's why Jesus set up the church. He says, I'm going to give you a mission, and you guys need to get in a church, and you need to be mutually accountable to each other and sitting under biblical instruction. That's how the plan goes. I meet people all the time and say, oh, yeah, man, we're on fire for the Lord. Yeah, we're serving here. We're serving. Well, what church are y'all part of? Oh, well, we're, Be careful of those people. Because someone who claims Jesus but has chosen not to be in mutual accountability and under the instruction of other believers and biblical instruction, you be careful of those people, because they probably have only one thing in mind, and that's, who are you accountable to? I'm asking you who are the people you are accountable to? Can you name them right now? Who are they? If you don't have them, you need to go get them. You need to pray them into your life. Who are the people that hold you accountable? Who are the people whose instruction you sit under? Who are the people who hold you in check? Do you have them? If you don't, you need to get them. God is always over the plan. The second reason we know He's in charge, before we close this out, is there's this interesting two verses that we read last week, and I want to just, when we're talking about baggage, and just point this out. So when Saul is being proclaimed as the king, remember the big moment right before he's hiding in the baggage? Remember that? And there's this thing that happens. Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel before the Lord, 1 Samuel 10, verse 20. And he brought them before the Lord, and the tribe of Benjamin was chosen by lot. That just means they're taking a vote. Then he brought each family of the tribe of Benjamin before the Lord, and the family of the Mitrites was chosen. And finally, Saul, son of Kish, was chosen from among them. Chosen? What do you mean? The people are chosen? I thought God already chose. What about the donkeys? What about the baggage? What about the women of the well? What about all the details? God's already picked Saul out. So why are the people voting if God's already determined it? Because God is letting the people decide what He's already decided. Now think on that just a minute. You'll be like, what? Wait, what? Think about this. God is letting the people decide what he's already decided. Here lies this profound and amazing intersection of God's sovereignty and the free will of man. Here is that intersection that causes so much theological debate among biblical scholars. That intersection of God's sovereignty and man's free will. But God lets the people decide what he's already decided. Another way of saying that is prayer. God lets you decide what he's already decided, meaning he's already got a plan, but he wants to use your prayers as part of the plan to get to the end. The amazing thing about God is, though he already has the plan, he chooses to use broken people and their prayers as a means to accomplish the plan. Now you could say, why do we need to pray? If God's already got a plan, if it's already worked out, why do I need to pray? First and foremost, you need to pray because God told you to. That's enough. But the second reason is because God wants to we don't know the plan. We don't know the details. God wants to use you as part of the plan. Your prayer, if the creator of the universe comes to me and says, I got a plan and I know how this is all going to end and I want you to be part of the plan. I'm saying, sign me up. Tell me what I need to do. Well, what you need to do is pray. Your prayers are part of the plan. God includes you as part of the great mission. That's why it matters that you pray, that you evangelize, that you preach, that you serve. So it breaks down like this. God's got this plan. And you got one choices. He lets us decide what he's already decided. So we got the beginning. And God is going from here to here when it all ends. And Jesus comes back and brings us all home into glory. Everything in between is where we are now. So God says, I'm going to start it this way. Now you got one of three choices. You can either be, look, he says, I'm starting here and we're getting there. But how we get there largely depends on you and your prayers. So, but either way, we're still getting there. You can either be submissive to the plan and completely surrendered to him. You can trust him and walk by faith through the plan. And that means, you still may suffer. You still will go through difficulty. You still will have hard times. But in the midst of it, you'll discover a joy that rises above anything the world can give or take away from you. And you'll learn the true meaning of joy. So in your submission and through your prayer and your faithfulness, you walk faithfully and joyfully. You discover joy through the plan. And then when you get to the end, you discover it was actually your joy and your submissiveness and your faithfulness that provides the groundwork for the glory you're about to get with Jesus forever. Now that's one option. The second option you have, God says, we're starting here, we're going there. But if you don't want to be submissive, you can still trust God, you can still believe in God, but you can be stubborn and you can be resistant. You know what this is like. This is like the Israelites, on again, off again. Some of us are the same way, on again, off again. In church, out of church. In the world, not of the world. On again, off, back and forth, back and forth. And you can be stubborn and you can be resistant, and God can drag you through the plan. But either way, you're still going here. You might think you're in charge, but you're not. God will drag you if he needs to. But you'll be miserable the whole way. And you'll be on again, off again. And then you get to the end, and because of your stubbornness, you'll look back at your life and realize how much of your life was wasted because you refused to be submissive. And you may get glory, but you'll regret everything back there because you wasted so much time being stubborn and resistant. And then finally, there's the third option, which is the most foolish of them all. You can actually reject the plan. But here's the thing about God. When you reject the plan and you decide, well, I'm not going to believe in God, I'm not going to trust in God, I'm not going to walk with God, I'm going to do it my way. Fine. But God says, your way ain't your way. I'll just take your no way and still make it my way, and I'll still make your rejection part of the plan. So you think you're making the decisions all along the way, but God is just using your rejection to accomplish the plan. You're still not in charge, even though you think you are. You have no idea who you are. You've lost your identity. And you'll go through life thinking right is wrong and wrong is right, and you will have no idea when all of a sudden you get to the end of the plan, and the difference between you and the other two people is you don't get to step over into glory. You step over into eternal punishment. That's the worst of the worst. But either way, God owns the plan. The choice is yours. Which is most logical? Be submissive. Be faithful. He lets us decide what He's already decided. And here's why that's important in 2020, church. I just want to tell you this. Just a side note. I've been looking so forward to 2020 because for us, He's Alive Church, it's the year of the upgrade. It's the year of the update. I'm excited. But I won't lie to you. Politically speaking, I'm dreading it all because it's an election year. And by the time the year is over, I fear it's going to get nasty. It's already gotten nasty. The political parties can never be further apart. There can never be any more conflict in our nation. And I'm just dreading this fall. And all the muck and the mire, where we're going to see the worst of some of the people. But here's what you need to know, politically speaking, because God still lets us decide what He's already decided. That's why you need to be part of the process. That's why it matters that you vote. You live in a nation with the incredible freedom to vote. It matters that you be part of the process because God is using you to decide what He's already decided. But here's the thing you need to know. Regardless of your political persuasion, the day after Election Day, some people will go, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. And some people are going to go, yes. But you need to understand this. Regardless of the outcome, I can 100% guarantee you, God is not going to go, my gosh, I never knew. He knows exactly what's going to happen. I don't know, honestly, if He handpicks presidents. I don't know that. So I know some of you may think that. I don't know that. How do we know that? I don't know if He handpicks. I don't know if it's God's chosen man. Or I don't know if He just takes the fool we put in there and says, well, I'm going to make him my chosen now. I don't know. He can do both. He's God. He can do whatever He wants to do. But it does not matter to me. Because when it's said and done, He's going to accomplish what He set out to accomplish. So you need to know this fall, it's going to be all right. You need to look at your neighbor right now and go, it's going to be all right. Pat him on the shoulder and say, it's going to be all right. God allows us to decide what He's already decided, and that's good news. You know why? Because whether it's lost donkeys or baggage, whatever this was not supposed to happen is, and we've all got them. Don't lie, we've all got them. But the beauty is that God, when it all breaks loose through our choices, through our sinful rebellion, can get into the middle of this was never supposed to happen and still make it right, still redeem it, and still make it beautiful, even the details of every single ounce of it. But for that to happen, this single thing has to happen first. And Bill, before we close out, tell them what that is.
Every person in here today has something in their life that was not supposed to happen. Something that came about through a choice they made or choices they've made. Some of you have many things in your life. Should have never happened. Should have never been that way. You come in with regrets. You come in with heavy burdens. Things that you wish, man, if you could just go back for a moment and just change that. But the truth is, you can't. You can't control what you brought in here. Those moments of never supposed to happen. But what we find in chapter 12 is that you can control where you go from here. And that's what he says. If you look in chapter 12, in verse 12, he says, "And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king." You said, "We need a king." And God said, "You got a king. It's me." No, that's not good enough. And in that moment, when what should have happened was Israel submitting to its king, the one true God, they rebelled. In verse 13, he says, "And now behold, the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you." What a verse. The king you chose is the one I set over you. The Lord sets over you. Now, what do you do from here? Should have never been like that. My mic should have never done that. Should have never been that way. But what do you do from here matters. Look at what he says in verse 14. If, the very fact it's if means this is conditional. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. It will be well. You got a choice today. Should have never happened, but now you're going to have a king. If you and the king obey me, serve me, live for me, fear me, it will be well. As in Romans 8:28, it says, "All things work together for good, but not for everyone." Works together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Those who fear the Lord, obey the Lord. My friends, you cannot go back and change one thing from your past. All the things that should have never been, all the failures, all the mistakes, all the junk. But you have control over what happens now and what you do now. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Where do you go from here? But listen, verse 15 is the other side of the coin. "But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king." We have a God who is so gracious, so loving, offering forgiveness in the midst of our sin and rebellion. But now we have a choice. Go and serve him. Go obey him. Take all those never should have happened and turn them over to the Lord. Or you continue to walk in a direction opposite him. On one side is blessing and all will be well. But on the other stands discipline and condemnation.
I watched with an anxious and pensive stare as I saw Lori exit the public health building that day. She walked toward the car and got in and looked at me. With a sigh of great relief, she looked at me and stated, thankfully, "All tests are negative." We held hands. She smiled. I smiled. We thanked God together. Unknown to us at that time, it would be the first of many together moments we would have for the rest of our lives that God would redeem. A relationship that began with one "this was never supposed to happen" moment. When I grabbed her hand that day in the car, I knew there was something special about this girl that I'd be smart to hold on to for a while. Because in that "this was not supposed to happen" moment, she had leveraged everything from her past just for a potential future with me. But it was never really about us that day. It was never really about our future that day. It was never really about a test that day. It was really about a girl who had come to know the grace and goodness of God, caught in a moment she never intended to be in, a moment I never intended to be in, a moment that was never supposed to happen, a moment she had regretfully put herself in by her own choices. And I was in that moment because of her choices, not even my own. Because sometimes you get into a not supposed to happen moment through choices that are not of your own. But it was also a moment she climbed out of by her own choices with God's help. She was never supposed to be in that moment, but she was. I was never supposed to be in that moment, but I was. She owned it, took responsibility for it, turned from it, trusted God with it, and moved forward. And because she did, in spite of whatever had taken place in our different paths separately that collided that day, we now had a start together, a new beginning together. Because God can take any "this was not supposed to happen" moment and still make it beautifully redemptive. And because she owned it and submitted to the plan beautifully, we got this. So I don't know what your "this was not supposed to happen" moment is today. I don't know if you put yourself there or somebody else put you there. But it's like Bill said, you can't change it. But today, you can start here, now.